Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Let's give everyone a minute to join and then we're going to get started. In the meantime, you can enjoy the view of Alan and I sitting on this wonderful leather couch.
And Jason just found out that I wake up at 8 a.m. every day instead of 7 a.m. like a real go-getter.
That's living the dream, Alan. And then we can start with a little bit of housekeeping in 30 seconds. This is a nice couch though, isn't it? I could do with one of these at home. My cat would ruin it though.
Yeah, it is a nice couch though.
Yeah, good job marketing team, I'd say.
I
They've done a
100%. I
good job.
mean, just just a beautiful studio.
Right. Okay, well, let's make a start, Alan. So, welcome everyone on the webinar. No, thank you for dialing in today. Appreciate your time. So, this is probably going to be the highlight of our webinar series this year.
I hope
Um,
not.
he says with a straight face, with Alan. So, quick introduction. Alan, tell us about yourself.
So my name's Allan Liska. I'm a ransomware researcher at here at Recorded Future and your employee, part of the CISO team. I am known by many as the ransomware sommelier, a title that was given to me by CNN by mistake. A good friend of mine, Sean Lingus, is a reporter there, and he had quoted me on something but forgot my title. And so, as a filler, he put in ransomware connoisseur, and then forgot. And it made it past his editor and got published as that. And I joked with him that I'm more of a sommelier because I help pair the right ransomware to the vulnerabilities in your network.
It's just so beautiful. It's the best job title ever as well, by the way. So a little bit of housekeeping for everyone who's on the webinar. We're going to have a conversation about ransomware for the next 25, 30 minutes. And given Alan's insights on ransomware over the last few years, we're going to open it up to everyone on the webinar to ask any questions that you'd like to ask as well. So yeah, so that's pretty much it, really, the plan. So as part of the preparation, we were talking about ransomware, and it got me thinking. The first time I remember a ransomware event, Alan, and it was December 2019 with Travelex, and I was like, "Who's this Sodden the Kiwi group?" And that's my first memory of actually it having major impact. And in the media, I just know how you remember that.
So, it's interesting because we were talking about that because, of course, in 2017, you had WannaCry and you had NotPetya, which were very impactful events, but they also weren't ransomware, really, because you couldn't pay a ransom to either one of those. And for one of them in particular, the NotPetya
Mm.
attack, even if you had paid a ransom, there was no way to recover your files because of the way it worked. Those were both also very much nation state backed attacks, whereas the Travelex was entirely a cyber criminal disrupting access for millions of people,
Mm.
and ultimately leaving Travelex to declare receivership in part because of the ransomware attack.
Yeah. Well, I think if we fast forward from nearly 5 years ago from that, not a lot has changed really, has it? Ransomware attacks are still very high risk, top of risk registers for most organizations. To some extent, defendable, but I just reflect on what we've had in the UK in the last few weeks. We had the Transport for London hack, which is still not fully recovered from, and the people are still paying the price of systems that are still not running at TfL. That was Lapsus, wasn't it?
Yep.
Bunch of crazy teenagers.
Right.
I'm not sure what the motive is, but the other one which resonates with me is the NHS had the pathologist lab that was taken out by ransomware, which caused thousands of operations.
Yeah,
So,
I think Singris or
mm,
Sin or something like that. Yeah.
and I think this is the long tail of ransomware attacks. There's the unintended consequences that cause major populations to really suffer and feel the pain of some of these attacks now.
Right. I mean, so in the US earlier this year, we had CDK, which was hit
Mm,
by a ransomware attack, and that disrupted the ability of auto dealerships around the country to be able to sell cars,
yeah.
basically. Like for months they wouldn't do it. And unlike healthcare, most auto dealerships don't have a pen and paper alternative
Yeah.
or a backup plan for something like that. So you think about how interconnected our
Yeah.
ecosystems are, and a ransomware attack against one major component to your organization
Yeah.
can have far-reaching impact.
Yeah, I try to have a bit of sympathy for car salesmen. I absolutely hate going to car sales rooms to negotiate with salespeople, unfortunately. But yeah, that's probably one of the least fun bits of being a grown-up, unfortunately.
No, no, it's no fun. But again, when we talk about that, for many communities, the auto dealer is the largest, at least in the
Mm,
U.S. For small towns, the auto dealer is the largest employer in that community,
yeah,
and but being the largest in a small community doesn't mean that they have a security staff
yeah,
or have backup plans for how to deal with that. And so, and we've seen this with other things. We've seen like dental offices, speaking of other not fun things to do,
yeah,
that have been impacted because one of the vendors that secured their X-rays
yeah,
got hit with a ransomware attack, and suddenly they couldn't look at patient data and
yeah,
so on. So these small businesses often get hit really hard when one of their larger, more secure vendors gets hit with a ransomware attack.
yeah. It's problematic. So we should make a little plug for the record, our news site, because there was a really interesting article, a report from a cyber insurance company called Coalition, I
Yep.
think. They produced a report last week on some ransomware payment trends, and a couple that I wanted to call out for discussion, which was there were fewer client claims in the first half of 2024 compared to 2023. However, the average claim size had jumped 14%. So paying less times, but the payment price had gone up. But the average loss of a ransomware event, according to Coalition's report, was $353,000, which is a lot of money, in the context of a security program's budget for a small organization, I'd say. But I think, the interesting part, which really stood out, is the average ransomware payment, which is above $1 million right now, $1.3 million. So that for me feels like a massive imbalance that, ransomware groups are demanding so much money. Cyber insurance claims are significantly smaller, which means organizations are having to spend an awful lot of money that they may not have.
Yeah. So I think we have to be careful with the average, because this year is the first year that I can recall
Mm.
that we've had three eight-figure ransom payments made, which I think jumps the average up a little
Oh,
bit.
wow. Do you remember who those three were? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I do, but I know we can't say two of them.
Okay.
But there was a $20 million ransom payment, there was a $14 million ransom payment, and a $75 million ransom payment.
Wow.
And those numbers skew the average
Yeah.
by a lot. But in general, ransom payments, even if you look at and I'm going back to my eighth grade math here. If you look at
Yeah.
the median number is still up over 2023, even though again, by most accounts, the actual number of ransomware attacks are down. It's just the ransomware actors getting more money. They're better at causing damage.
Yeah. Um, I think it's the damage, and I think actually we were both on a client presentation last week. Is the evolution of tactics from ransomware groups now? Because it used to be get in, encrypt, demand. Then there was the extortion. Then there was the double extortion, and then I think on the call, which I learnt last week, was there's the not even encrypting data, but just going public to damage the brand. And I just, how does that evolution continue? Because they have to evolve or basically die, don't they?
Right. Well, and that is one of the things. About 30% of the attacks that we see right now are data theft only.
Yeah.
The advantage of those attacks is it doesn't matter where the data comes from.
Yeah.
So that means that if you're a security team now, your data governance, it has to be part of your routine. We normally leave that into like the compliance team.
Yeah.
That's now your remit. And because it doesn't matter where the bad guys get your data, if your name is on there,
Yeah.
that's what goes up on the extortion site, and you're the and you get the call from Financial Times, not your vendor. I mean, think about what happened I guess a month ago now. Jesus, this industry moves fast with CrowdStrike,
Yeah.
and how everybody was like, oh, there was a Microsoft outage,
Yeah.
because it was the Microsoft systems affected.
Yeah. It does move so quickly, and it makes me feel very old some days when I think that was only last. Oh, it was 3 months ago. Moves way too quickly. Just trying to get my thoughts back on track, actually. I I was pondering, and now I think that actually this is, I know, I think for probably everyone who's watching this who works in cybersecurity is, where is my data? I think it's so easy to buy a SaaS app today and put corporate data in, and the challenge, remains is, what's the criticality of that data that you're now putting our organization's data into? What is the security posture of this third party that I've put the data in? What's the data retention? What's the data encryption? What's their incident response plan? And this becomes a soft underbelly for most organizations is we don't know where this data is until it's too late. And the things that as security practitioners that we want is, we want to have, the basic good hygiene of, admin accounts have specific admin accounts. One of the things we learned from Okta is, lock down the IP addresses that you could administer from, lock down the authentication settings, things like that. Is when we don't go through the InfoSec team and the policies and processes, this is where the risk gets introduced and causes, these types of, brand situations, doesn't it?
Right. You know, our marketing team really, really hates this analogy, so cover your ears for a second. But when you talk specifically about the data,
Yeah,
it's like the from the 90s, the PSA about STDs. It's not
yeah,
just who you've slept with, but
yeah,
who all they've slept with, and it's the same thing with your data. It's not just where your data is
yes,
and where your data in your cloud is, but your partner's data is in your
yeah,
partner's cloud. But it's so much more than that. That chain of security that kind of covers, that basically, um, any one kink in that chain
yeah.
can cause a problem.
We got such digital footprints. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
That's so much bigger now. I remember doing my first firewalls in 1996. Everything sat behind our checkpoint firewall on our Windows NT servers, and that was it. There was nothing else.
Pix firewall for me, but same
Well,
basic
yeah,
concept.
old school. But the world's changed, hasn't it? And I think cloud SaaS, it makes it so much easier. But this comes the risk as well.
Right. And that again, and we see that because we are a vendor,
Yeah,
and so we get those questionnaires all the
yeah,
time. How are you securing that? And I think we've even seen the move from not just security questionnaires now to, we need attestations, we
yeah.
need your pen test, and and then some vendors that want to, or some customers that want to do their own pen testing to make sure.
Yeah, this for me is one of the biggest problems of attestation of security companies like ourselves. This is a soapbox moment for me, which is these types of pen test reports are just a moment in time, and they really don't give you the full picture. And the difficulty is no one's ever going to be able to give you the full picture because it moves so quickly and so it changes so variably as well, unfortunately.
Right.
And
How many how many questionnaires have we gotten over the last year of, with Log4j, for
yeah,
example? Hey, what's your exposure to Log4j? What's your exposure to this? Every time a new major vulnerability is exploited,
mm,
we get those hits, and but I don't know how else you go about doing that other than constant continuous pen testing. You can't do that for all of your vendors.
no, you don't. No, it's yeah, we probably get on average maybe 2 or 3 a week
Yeah,
from all of our clients, and that in itself is hard work.
absolutely.
That's definitely not one of the fun parts of the job, but it's an important part nonetheless. So I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, yeah, answering 350 questions on a Thursday afternoon is not most people's idea of fun, unfortunately. And if that is your idea of fun, then I'd love to talk to you about coming to help us. Um, so One of the things I did want to talk about, which really stood out for me this year, was in Australia, where and this is connected to law enforcement activity more widely, which the US, UK, Australia, the EU, have been really trying to go after naming attackers. The one that stood out for me was Medibank in
Hmm.
Australia, because they actually were able to strongly identify particular individuals and put hands on keyboards. Um, but it seems to have dropped off in the second half of this year with law enforcement activity. I don't know if you've got any more insights on what's going on there.
I don't know that it has. So, I mean, we've seen that that I know of. We've seen 19 law enforcement activity against ransomware groups
Yeah,
this year, which is more than we've seen in any kind of a similar period of time. That includes obviously the Lockbit takedown and
yeah,
all the intel gathered from that, but it also includes a lot of smaller groups like the Dispossessor ransomware.
yeah,
That infrastructure was fully exposed.
yeah,
We've seen the arrest of 3 members of Scattered Spider.
yeah,
So that's been good. And again, it may be part of the reason why we are seeing few ransomware attacks, but it also means the ransomware groups that are out there know that their shelf life may be limited, and that
yeah.
may be why we're seeing higher ransom demands and more ferociousness in the attacks that they're carrying out.
Hmm. How do you, this is a maybe a controversial question, but I know that in the industry of ransomware payments, it's quite divisive, isn't it, about the do you pay, do you not pay? And I think Australia, in their new legislation for cyber, aren't they? They're going to make ransomware payments illegal.
Uh,
Or you have to, no,
right, they're making it
you have
reportable.
to report
Right.
it. Sorry, yes,
Right. If you make more than if your business makes more than 3 million a year,
that's right. Yeah,
you are required to report any ransom payments. And I think that's a good start.
yeah,
I'm all for a ransom ban.
yeah,
I don't think it's practical. I think
yeah,
there are a lot of reasons why it won't work. Um, but making all ransom payments reportable, I think, is a really good start because even the government doesn't know how many ransom payments are made. Like,
yeah,
we rely on companies like Chainalysis, and
yeah,
Chainalysis is amazing. I love them and I love their work.
yeah,
They do a great job. But but we rely on companies like that for talking about how much ransom payment is, and they're only tracking the wallets that they know, and
yeah,
so on. So if we have mandatory reporting, at least we can get an idea of where the money's
yeah,
going, and that also means that the law enforcement can redirect efforts to those cryptocurrency exchanges that are harboring the
yeah,
bad guys, and can we sanction them, and can we claw some of that money back,
yeah.
etc. It gives them more tools.
So I think I'm probably a little bit more nuanced. If you're a company that the actual cost of trying to restore your data is so significant that it's actually cheaper to pay the fine, that's just a cost of doing security badly.
Right.
Unfortunately, incentivizes criminals to do this more and perpetuates them being able to do more crime, unfortunately, but not against your business. At the end of the day, if I was selfish, as I was in that situation and I could afford the money, I would definitely want to try and pay the money to get my systems back more quickly.
Right.
I was reading about the Medibank hack, and they made $250 million available from the regulator to go and clean up that. Now that to spend on that security debt versus paying 2 million to pay the ransomware fine, you know, as a cost of business, that's probably much easier to sleep with
Yeah.
and deal with.
Well, and that's why, I mean, that is why paying the ransom is attractive to a
Yeah,
lot of organizations is you don't have to deal with the mess of having your data leaked. You don't have to, you get the key back faster. It
yeah,
may not speed up recovery.
yeah.
Recovery still takes a really long time, even with getting the key.
Mm,
A lot of people think, oh, well, I'll get the key and then I'm done in a week. And no, it doesn't work like that.
yeah,
There's a lot that goes into it because you are suddenly dealing with all of that technical debt and
yeah.
security debt that you've kind of put off. But, but the problem, of course, like you said, is it just makes more bad guys and it makes the bad guys better.
Yeah, I was wondering, where organizations have paid ransoms, What is the likelihood of them being targeted again because they've paid out once?
There's a stat that's been floating around for years that 86% of companies who pay a ransom are targeted.
Right.
But I don't know that that's true. Like I've seen that one company, and I'm not gonna, because I don't want to call out a competitor for something that I think is bad.
Mm,
I've seen that one company requote that stat for years now,
right.
and I've never seen anybody else able to verify it. So there's probably some kind of incentive there, but I also think that we have to remember that one of the things that happens after you get hit with a ransomware attack is that security budget you've been asking for years and
Mm,
years suddenly becomes available. It's the magic funds just appear. And so you have everybody in the company on much more high alert
yeah.
after a ransomware attack. So I do think it is actually harder most of the time to infect after that.
Yeah, I just, how much do you trust criminals at the end of the day?
Oh, I'd never trust criminals.
No, definitely not. So, and one of the other things in the preparation for this we were considering and discussing, which is the evolution of ransomware attacks beyond criminals for financial gain, and how state-sponsored groups with connections, are using ransomware as a cover. And I don't know if you've been following another sort of shameless plug for the Record website. There's a report that came out last week. Edward Benderisky, apologies for the pronunciation, I've probably butchered it, but
You don't have to
he's a
apologize.
Russian intelligence officer who has been very closely linked to Evil Corp. So we should talk about that because this connection of Russian government to ransomware groups. What's going on there?
So, it's been rumored for years, and you even going back to 2022 with the Conti leaks,
Yeah.
where in their leak,
Blast from the past, Conti
yeah,
links. Gosh, that takes
they
me back.
they explicitly said in their chat that they had connections into SVR, and
Mm,
there was some assumption that that's probably true, and then some of it is, of course, is just criminals bragging
yeah,
the way they do. And there's long been suspected connections between ransomware groups based out of Russia and the Russian government because
yeah.
the Russian government knows what's going on,
Mm,
and one of the costs of doing business may be, hey, if you see something interesting, send it over to us.
mm.
Now we're starting to see with this connection, and you mentioned the prisoner swap.
Oh, in July, Roman Seleznev,
Right.
aka Track 2.
Right. We're now seeing that there's definitely, you know, intelligence, intelligence services saying yes, there's a connection
Yeah,
between Russian ransomware groups and the Russian government. But we've also seen that in Iran,
yeah.
and we've seen that in China as well.
So I'm very curious about how Iran might be using ransomware. Any more insights on that? Because that is quite topical given what's happening in the Middle East right now.
So Iran's always been strange because Iranian ransomware groups are ostensibly cyber criminal groups,
Mm,
but there seem to be two different types of targets that they have. There's the targets where where they hit the victims and collect the data and then don't ever demand the ransom.
yeah,
And then there's the ones where they do. And it's almost like, all right, 9 to 5, you carry out ransomware attacks on behalf of the Iranian government, and then when you go home, do whatever you want, and you
mm,
get to keep that money. And so we've seen some oddities where attacks on energy companies
mm,
where the data is stolen and never appears on an extortion site or
yeah,
anything like that. Attacks on Israel where data is stolen
yeah,
and things are disrupted, but there's never a demand for ransom.
right,
And then some random company in the U.S. gets hit and they want a ransom payment, and otherwise the data will be leaked.
yeah,
So we see that a lot. Same thing when you talk about China. We've
yeah,
seen attacks that appear to be attributed to cyber criminals in China, where it's really clearly meant as a disruptive attack. A couple of years ago, a number of gas stations in Taiwan weren't able to pump gas
Mm.
because of a ransomware attack. So a chain, I don't remember the name, was hit, and they weren't able to pump gas for a few days while they got their systems restored.
Yeah.
There was never demand for ransomware or anything like that. That was meant as a disruptive attack.
Yeah, sending a strong signal,
Right.
unfortunately, or maybe not a strong signal, but a very strong, I guess, signal of intent,
Right.
perhaps.
Well, it gives you that level of deniability, right?
Yeah,
Because hey, it wasn't us; it was cyber criminals. We will,
yeah,
we will try and track down those baddies for sure.
yeah,
But if it happens often enough, you start to be like, all right, this is just a cover for
yeah,
something else.
definitely. So we were also talking about actually the bigger problem, sorry, of security programs. And why ransomware is still being successful. And 3 years ago, and I think Alan and I spent a lot of time talking about initial access brokers and the importance of tracking initial access broker posts to look for things that might look like your organization.
Right.
And is that still the case? I probably haven't followed a lot of initial access brokers recently, unfortunately. But is that still a thing, or is that changing?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things that we've done at Recorded Future is we've built out our ransomware risk profile and released that just last week. And the initial access brokers are a big part of the success of ransomware
Yeah,
because they act as a force multiplier.
yeah,
If you can buy your access, then you can jump in and move immediately and you can carry out more attacks as a ransomware actor.
yeah.
So it's worth it to spend a few grand on that and do that.
Mm,
And we see so much initial access right now because there is a ready market for any victims you can get your hands on.
yeah,
And that is whether you're, exploiting a vulnerability, whether it's through identity,
yeah,
whether it's through a phishing attack, all of these different methods, and it's cheap.
yeah.
The guy that was behind the raccoon stealer, who was arrested in Poland a few years ago and is now on trial in the U.S. You could rent his infrastructure for $200 a month. So for less than a car payment for most people,
Wow,
you could send out hundreds of thousands of info stealer
wow.
phishing attacks, and you know bam, you potentially have a couple dozen targets by that time. So for a $200 investment, you're potentially talking about millions in ransomware at the end result of that.
That's a very low entry point, isn't it? That
Yeah.
sort of price.
Speaking of which,
Yes.
fun thing for anybody thinking about becoming a cyber criminal. Um, the guy behind Raccoon Stealer was arrested because when Russia invaded Ukraine, he fled Ukraine to Poland. And his Instagram model girlfriend documented the whole thing, and that's how they were able to arrest them because they tracked her. And as soon as they went into Poland, authorities notified Polish law enforcement. Polish law enforcement
Yeah.
picked them up. So if you are thinking about getting into cybercrime, despite the appeal, do not date an Instagram model girlfriend.
Mm. Well, I'm not advocating for that. Maybe just better
Oh, right.
operational security.
My apologies. 100% absolutely date an Instagram model
Yeah.
girlfriend.
If you can, I'd say go for it. Life's too short.
Right.
What or boyfriend. We don't
Or
want
girlfriend, right. Yeah, I
we
mean, date whoever you want.
exactly
The
live your
important
best
thing
life.
is that they must have a strong online presence and leave their geotags open.
Small things do matter, though,
Right.
unfortunately, don't they? And I'm sure he regrets his girlfriend behaving like that. But say la vie. Now we haven't talked about info stealer malware yet, but I think that's like 3 years since it's been a thing now. Though I remember my first interactions with info stealer malware logs was from Dimitri just
Mhm.
before Thanksgiving 2021, just as the US went on Thanksgiving break, and my boss gave me about 300 accounts to follow up on to say, can you clean this up? I was like, oh, you eat turkey? I've got this for the next 2 days. But no, why I mentioned that is no, it is the initial access point from InfoStealerMail, which becomes very important now. And the other bit that we talk about a lot is At that point, Raccoon Stealer, and there were only 2 other Info Stealer malware families at that point. But I think, we're over 20 now, aren't we?
Yeah, there's more than 20 that are there are dozens out there,
Yeah,
but there are 20 that are really big right now, or more than 20 that are really big right now
yeah,
that we're tracking. And I mean, again, we're tracking millions of logs a month. And
yeah,
think about it. This goes all the way back to Zeus, right? Because Zeus was really the first,
yeah.
but how much it's evolved from a simple I say simple, for the time it was
Mm,
complex, a simple banking Trojan to a full-on like modular, a full-on modular based info stealer malware. So you
yeah.
can basically you have a menu of different things that you can pick and choose that this info stealer malware can do for you.
Yeah, I think the bit that I think terrifies me the most about InfoStealer malware is because those tokens are baked into what you steal, is you bypass MFA controls, you
Right.
bypass, in some instances, hardware authentication capabilities, which, is definitely a worry where you're trying to implement zero trust models now. And I think not everyone quite realizes the impact of that, where, particularly in organizations that are very SaaS oriented, becomes a definite, visibility problem.
Oh yeah, no, it absolutely is. I mean, it's one of the reasons why it's not enough just to have the MFA. You
Yeah.
also need to know, hey, where are these people supposed to be logging in from? And which is hard. You think of an organization like ours where you never know what city I'm going to be in, although I'm not going to be in Russia, but
Or China.
or China, right? But I mean, it does make it really hard because again, you have to have all of that information about where your people are and how they're logging in and how they're supposed to log in.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to some really fundamental practices for IT and security that, everyone struggles with, unfortunately. And, it's not because you can't, it's just because, retrofitting some of these policies, processes becomes really difficult, doesn't it?
Right.
So let's pause there for a moment, and, I'm going to encourage everyone who is on here, if you want to submit a question, because we've got a few now, so I'm going to actually start by throwing a couple of questions over to you,
Okay.
Alan. So a question for you, Alan. Many ransomware operators are based in Russia or outside the jurisdiction of the US, EU, UK, Oceania law enforcement agencies. What impact are sanctions actually having on the ransomware landscape?
So one of the things that was really interesting, I thought, in the Lockbit takedown is that they, in addition to all of the information on the affiliates, they also recovered, law enforcement did 200 crypto wallets,
Yeah,
because it's one thing to collect a ransom payment, it's another thing to be able to actually launder that money further.
yeah,
And I think that is one of the areas where sanctions does help. A lot of these ransomware groups aren't able to take that money and do anything with it. Now, it sucks because they still have it sitting there in crypto
yeah,
wallets. But they don't, but they're not able to then go to the next step. So I do think that's one area where sanctions are helping.
yeah,
Obviously, we need more. We need to figure out ways that we can better impact those ransomware groups that we can't reach.
yeah,
But ransomware is not just Russia based. A lot of the groups are
yeah,
based out of Russia, but the affiliates that carry out the ransomware attacks are all over the world now.
yeah,
And so let's focus on shutting that down and then, really isolating the Russian groups and other places that law enforcement can't reach now, isolating those.
yeah. I guess if you can't move your money out, the reason for carrying out the attack is somewhat negated, isn't it?
I mean, some of them just do it. Scattered Spider's a great example. They just do it for the lulz. And so if any ransom they collect is just bonus,
Yeah,
they're more chaos agents than they are cyber criminals.
yeah. That's always the case, isn't it? On the internet, there's always going to be groups with, differing motivations, aren't there?
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that goes right back to, why do we talk about threat intelligence? It really is, who are the groups I have to pay attention to and worry about, and which ones can I ignore who actually have risk and impact to my business, which is the always evolving problem. So another question, this is a forward-looking question. Where do you see the evolution of ransomware between now and mid 2025? Are there some early trends that for people who are defenders that can be paying attention to, preparing for, that are things we should be looking at?
So, you and I were talking about this earlier. Defending against a ransomware attack, especially that initial access broker, is kind of an all hands on deck because it's a cross-platform problem, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about identity, but also anytime an SSL VPN vulnerability is announced, within 24 hours, we see scanning, and within 48 hours, exploitation of
Yeah.
that. So your vulnerability team has to be out there and patching those things faster.
Yeah.
We say patch all the things. Obviously, that's not practical, but patch all the things that are exposed to the internet, that are attacked by ransomware groups. So I do think that we need to be faster at doing those things
Yeah.
because that's what the ransomware actors are getting really good at. They're good at info stealers,
Yeah.
and they're good at exploiting certain types of vulnerabilities very quickly, and that's going to continue to improve. I think really where we're going to see a lot of developments is law enforcement, from the takedowns they've done so far this year,
Yeah.
have gathered a lot of intelligence, and they're moving faster at collating that intelligence and carrying out more arrests. And I think we're going to see more of that. And I'm hoping that means that, again, we isolate ransomware activity to those countries where we can't have a direct impact.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, actually, because I think if I'm a security team in a security team and I'm trying to continue to think about how do I mitigate the impact of ransomware, where do I put my time and resource and effort to have the best bang for my buck? Where do you invest that time and effort? Is it in detection? Is it in lateral movement? Is it in putting tokens and other things around sensitive data storage areas? Where would you think is the best place to try and invest your time and effort to protect?
If you can keep the initial access brokers out, then
Yeah.
you stop the ransomware chain.
Right.
So I always recommend people investing there, and that is really, it goes down to the things that we've talked about for years. That's good identity management,
Yeah.
good asset management, and good data management. If you can do those three things, and that's not easy, but it's easier than threat hunting for lateral movement.
Yeah.
It's easier than trying to remove a ransomware actor who's landed on your domain
Yeah.
controller and
Yeah.
trying to get out. That, if you can do those three things and keep them from ever getting into network, then the rest of it is easy. But yes, certainly threat hunting, the tools that the ransomware actors use once they're in the network, Cobalt Strike,
Yep.
beacons, Brute Ratel beacons, Silver beacons, all
Yep.
these kind of things that we track,
Yeah.
that you can track that behavior on, looking for that, and then looking for the tools that they use, the Mimikatz, the Ad Finder, the Bloodhound, like those tools that are constantly being used. You should have yarn signal rules built into your seams so that
Yeah.
you're logging and alerting on those. And, I think a big one that a lot of people miss out on is your EDR is really good at stopping ransomware. And so when it's configured properly, and so one of the first things they do is kill the EDR when they land on a new box. What are you doing if a third-party tool kills your EDR on a device? How does that alert show up on your SOC? Because
Yeah.
that should be red flags going off in an immediate action, but for too many organizations, it's not.
Yeah.
And so those are the kind of things that you have to think about: is what is the ransomware actor doing, and how am I processing that
Yeah.
alert?
Yeah.
Because that's the other end of it. Is I know we are so inundated with alerts.
Yeah.
It is so painful to try and go through all of them, but there are certain things that should be kind of like, oh, this is a real red flag, and we should look at this immediately.
And I think this is the perennial problem that 40 years later we still have too many alerts because we don't want to have blind spots by tuning out too much, but
Right.
equally we have to accept that we want the noise as well, because we'd rather have the noise and filter out rather than remove the noise and actually filter out true positives as well. And yeah, I'm personally hopeful that maybe AI can do some of these things, in the future, hopefully. I don't know if it's quite there yet, but anyway, we've got time for another couple of questions. And um, with the US US election looming large, are you at all concerned about ransomware as a threat to the US election systems, voting systems, or is it more of a, in quotes, commercial business problem?
I'm always concerned about ransomware in elections.
Yeah,
And there's two sort of components to that. One, our election system is a mess. Because it's not one election systems, it's 58 election
yeah,
systems, the states plus the territories and the District of Columbia, and then sometimes different districts even have different information. So one ransomware attack isn't necessarily going to impact the entire election.
yeah.
The problem is the disinformation that comes anytime that anything goes wrong
We
in a
nearly got through this without talking about misin and disinformation.
I'm sorry, do I need to take a shot?
Go now.
Yeah, but and we saw this in the 2020 election where a ransomware attack happened in a county in Georgia, um, didn't affect the election systems at all,
Yeah,
but there was just instantly all kinds of misinformation and disinformation that was posted on
yes,
on there, and so it's not just the ransomware attack
yeah.
itself, it's the kind of the fallout from everything else that can happen.
Well, if you're on the losing side of that election, you're going to use anything and everything to throw shade, as they would say, if I was a teenager,
Right.
to throw shade at the validity of the results, wouldn't you? So,
There is, and but there are also people that just do it because because obviously the losing side's going to do that, but there are other governments that just want. I mean, not that we're not doing a good enough job
mm.
of our own homebrewed disinformation, and I'll get off that topic, but there are other governments that are going to amplify anything like that.
For sure, yeah. So keep the questions coming in, please. No, we've still got a few minutes. I mean, we'd love to take you up to the hour, but obviously, you probably have lots of other meetings to go to. So another really good question. Thank you. How are the current ransomware attacks impacting SMEs and mid-market companies' cyber insurance? Do you know if there is a surge in policies being underwritten? Are ransomware attacks a primary motive to underwrite cyber insurance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said it yourself. Average recovery is
Yep,
$350,000
yep,
for ransomware. Most SMEs can't afford anywhere, and obviously
yep,
they're not 350,000, but they can't afford the cost, so they're relying
yeah,
on cyber insurance. But it's increasingly difficult to get a cyber insurance policy.
yes,
They've increase the minimum standards of security in order to even underwrite a policy. And so a lot of small and medium sized companies, they can't afford cyber insurance anymore. It's
yeah,
just they've been priced out of it, or they're forced to take a policy that maybe isn't going to provide the level of support that they might need after an
yeah.
attack.
Well, I think actually in the UK, NCSC have been pushing Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus as the condition for getting cyber insurance coverage in the first place, and that's hugely controversial, because I think many organisations just hope that by buying a cyber insurance um, certificate, that that's the cover and that's all you need. Actually, one thing we didn't talk about, which came out of the coalition report, was business email compromise was actually the number one threat vector that they were paying out for, not ransomware. Which and we talk about problems that are new. I mean, business email compromise has been around for a very long time, and we're still not really effectively solving that problem either.
Well, so the problem with business email compromise is, unlike ransomware, the business email compromise actors don't brag about their victims. So
Mm,
we don't know. Like, ransomware victims don't like to talk about it.
yeah,
Business email compromise victims don't like to talk about it.
yeah,
The difference is that ransomware effectively has its own PR arm.
yeah,
Business email compromise doesn't. So I
yeah,
do think that there's likely more money spent on business email compromise. We just don't know about them
Yeah.
because it's not done through the blockchain, so there's no way to track the transactions.
Yeah.
It's all, it's all wire transfers, so it's
Mhm.
all legitimate. If only there was a threat intelligence company that was owned by a financial services firm that could maybe do better insight into that.
I'm wondering who it might be.
I don't know.
Anyway, let's get back to some more questions because they are flooding in. So another question for you, Alan. Has the disruption to Lockbit and Black Cat and recent events on Telegram caused any observable change in the behavior of threat actors?
So there are a couple of things that we are seeing. What's really interesting is if you look at our sandbox submissions,
Yeah,
so Recorded Future owns Triage, the number of Lockbit submissions has actually gone up since the Lockbit takedown, but
interesting.
it's not from Lockbit proper.
Right.
What it is a lot of Lockbit's affiliates have now been burned 3 or 4 times being part of a ransomware as a service group,
Yeah,
and so they're basically going out on their own.
right.
But because the Lockbit code is readily available and they know how to use it, they're basically starting up their own ransomware company using the leaked Lockbit code.
Mm,
And so one of the things I have my interns doing is going through all those submissions, looking at those ransom notes,
yeah,
looking for the different site names and where they're
interesting.
pointing people to and how they're doing it and how that's kind of evolving.
Yeah,
But I think, I mean, it's basically, it's like now a lot of ransomware is moving toward basically 4 guys sitting around drinking vodka and doing ransomware rather
mm,
than these big
yeah,
multinational affiliate programs.
right. Interesting. That is, I guess, yeah, why create from scratch when you can just reinvent and the cost to innovate and get started is zero.
Right. So one of the most popular ransomware groups right now is 8base, which
Yeah,
got started with Phobos.
yeah,
And then every time they get paid a ransom, part
yeah,
of that money goes to improving the code base that they
yeah,
originally got from Phobos
yeah,
and making a more effective ransomware payment. And
yeah,
we'll likely see that with these groups as well, basically making improvements
yeah,
to the lockpick code because there is, again, we talked about the
yeah,
ransomware ecosystem. There is part of that ransomware ecosystem where
yeah,
our developers who are offering their services
yeah,
to improve your ransomware.
yeah. Interesting. Someone actually provided a bit of feedback on cyber insurance. The market at the moment is suffering. There is plenty of capacity. Clients that could previously not secure cover can now, with limits increasing and deductibles dropping. That's good. So, my views on cyber insurance in the UK were from one of my friends who works for a cyber insurance provider. Um, not yeah. So anyway, the feedback is we rarely come across any insurer asking for cyber essentials or cyber essentials plus. So that's interesting perspective. So
Yeah, that is.
that's good context. I appreciate that. That's what I wasn't expecting. So that is positive. Another question on BEC in the time we got left, Alan. On the topic of BEC, isn't this considered a prelude to ransomware attacks? If initial access brokers are a major facilitator of ransomware attacks, this is commonly achieved via BEC or InfoStealer malware, or is that incorrect?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right.
Tend to be two very different groups. So
Yeah.
a lot of BEC operates out of Africa,
Yeah.
Nigeria, Kenya specifically, versus a lot of at least the operators of ransomware groups are operating out of Russia
Yeah.
and Russian states. So there is some cross pollination with the InfoStealer infrastructure because both BEC actors and
Yeah.
ransomware actors will rent the same BEC, or excuse me, InfoStealer infrastructure.
Yeah.
But there generally isn't a lot of cooperation between the two groups right now.
Yeah.
It'd be really scary if that changes.
Yeah.
But as of right now, I don't see a lot of cross pollination there. I may be wrong. There may be things I just don't know about, but I haven't seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hope that doesn't go like that. And one last question, then we're going to wrap up on this one because I'm very respectful that people have given us 49 minutes already and they have other things to do in the day. This is the last one. As a SME entrepreneur, I find it really concerning the possibility of a ransomware attack and its consequences. what are the services that must be in place to cover as much of this risk as possible? And can you answer that in 60 seconds? Sorry.
Yeah. So what I tell for small businesses, look at, depending on the size of your organization, and EDR often isn't isn't a possibility, isn't a viability.
Yeah.
Managed detection response might be a good way to spend your resources
Yeah.
because they can help find a lot of these things. But again, going back to good identity management, even for small businesses, knowing
Yeah.
who your employees are, where they're logging in from is really important, and enable multi-factor authentication. I know we talked about how info stealers will take
Yeah.
tokens and so on, but having multi-factor authentication is still a better
Yeah.
solution. So those are kind of the two areas I would invest in.
Yeah.
Look at an MDR solution, a managed detection response.
Yeah.
Look at making sure you're doing really good identity management, and acting on those. I mean, for small businesses, something like Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned
Yeah.
is a great service for finding out.
Yeah.
And often there's a free version of it
Yeah.
of, hey, here's leaked credentials from my
Yeah.
organization, and taking action quickly on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, some nice tips there for starters that, maybe some of it does cost money, some of it doesn't.
Right.
But yeah, that's some pretty important foundational investments you have to make if you're an entrepreneur setting up a company. So we're going to finish there and let everyone get back to the rest of the day. So I'm going to say thank you, Alan. It's been educational.
Thank you.
Been great. We've had some fantastic questions from everybody as well. So thank you for all the questions and feedback. It's been great to have some of these conversations without slides, without marketing. Sorry, marketing. But just to chew the fat on some of these subjects and get someone with your expertise to talk about this. So we're going to finish up with a couple of fun facts as it's Tuesday, October the 15th. If you like cheese, it's National Cheese Curd Day. So if you get to the cheese shop, have that with your wine. You can also have a shawarma. It's National Shawarma Day as well. But for those of us who are of a certain age, October the 15th, 1973, Dolly Parton released Jolene.
Which is why I'm very upset that we couldn't do this at Dollywood.
Ah.
With a plate of poutine in front of us
Yeah.
and going out for shawarma later would be just a great day.
Well, I was asking marketing for that to be our play-out tune, but it's still not playing yet. So never mind. Anyway, we don't all get what we want. Oh, can you hear that? Yeah. Anyway, well, look, thank you. We'll let you get to your next day, lunch, meetings, whatever you're having. But thank you again. Appreciate your time and have a great rest of week. So thank you again. Take care.